This was no act of God. This was no act of God or mere unlucky accident. This was no act of God or mere unlucky accident. All the money that has been expended on the process so far, much more is almost certain to be spent before the families will see a single dime or dollar, before the families will see a single dime or dollar in compensation. It will not sit well with everybody. There may be those who will be outraged.
The Commission of Inquiry, he said, cost a total of $15.5 million.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. To the Honourable Prime Minister, given that the final report of the Commission of Inquiry into the Paria tragedy recommended that compensation be given to the families of the victims who were involved in this fatality without accepting liability, will the Prime Minister state if the government has considered offering compensation either through Paria or other avenues to the affected families on behalf of the state?
Mr. Speaker, as you will be aware, there was this unspeakable tragedy that took place in Pointe-à-Pierre approximately 2 years ago. My friend from Pointe-à-Pierre and others demanded a commission of inquiry. The government heard those demands and, in fact, encouraged, and Paria did take part in the commission of inquiry, and we now have the report of a commission of inquiry with recommendations. Suffice it to say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that this matter remains mainly a legal matter of liabilities and responsibilities, and it would be quite unusual at this stage for the government to override the responsibility and role of the board and other entities involved. Even though Paria is a state-owned entity, the government is not now in a position to override those situations.
I recognize the member for Opuchis.
Thank you very much, is the Honourable Prime Minister suggesting that any attempt to assist those families by way of compensation and financial help will only or can only be considered after a protracted legal process emanating from the report of the Commission of Inquiry?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, you were present when I spoke. I said no such thing to be improper for me to take any position as implied by my colleague.
Okay, member for Pointe-à-Pierre.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Prime Minister, as a follow-up to your response to my colleague, do you feel it's, and my question is, do you feel it is good practice to allow the present board to adjudicate on the report findings of the Commission of Inquiry?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, if the present board doesn't do it, which board does he want to do it?
Member for Opuchis.
Thank you very much. And following up on my colleague's question as well, again, is the Prime Minister suggesting that the present board of Paria that has been found wanton by a commission of inquiry is now in charge of assessing the report and further action to be taken, when that seems incomprehensible?
What's the question?
The question is, does the Prime Minister believe that board should be fired forthwith, given that they have been named in that report as negligent?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I would assume that my colleague from Oropouche East would know that regardless of who is in office at Paria, Paria will take appropriate legal advice in treating with any and all aspects of this matter, notwithstanding the, what they call it, the advice in court that's free. Not pro bono, amicus.
Amicus.
Yeah, amicus.
Opuchis.
Follow-up question. Prime Minister, don't you believe it is untenable for the current board that has been found wanting in a report to take legal advice now to help themselves? Don't you think that they have already been compromised and conflicted and ought to be removed and allow another board to take whatever action is deemed necessary.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the status of the board of Paria is a matter for the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago, and I will not take any advice from the member from Orupuchis.
Member for Orupuchis, next question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I seek facts now, not advice.
Member.
Will the Prime Minister state the amount spent in legal fees by state-owned Paria for the just concluded Commission of Inquiry, with specific amounts paid to Gilbert Peterson and Jason Mutu?
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the figures available at this time is that Paria has spent to date $8,548.18, with a further $899,513.17 being processed for payment. The breakdown is not available to me at this time.
All the money that has been expended on the process so far, much more is almost certain to be spent before the families will see a single dime or dollar.
Good night, everyone. My name is Vanessa Kusi. I am the wife of Rishi Ryan Nagasa, the late. I don't like to say late, but it's the late Rishi Ryan Nagasa. I'm standing here before you, still waiting for justice for my husband. The Paria tragedy. Next month will be 2 years since this accident happened, and we are still waiting for justice. I stand together with the 4 other families as we want justice for the 4 deceased divers and the lone survivor. February 25th, when this accident happened at Paria, neither LMCS or Paria officials had called me. I got the news from a fisherman out at sea. When this news reached my home, the echoes of my screams were heard throughout my street. My house was filled in minutes. Myself and my family went to Paria. First, we saw the securities. We asked them if there were accidents that happened there, about maybe 3:30 or so, and they said no, there's no accident they know about. Now this there starts with a lie. A few minutes after, I saw an ambulance coming out from Paria. My uncle stopped him, the driver, and he asked about the incident that took place inside Paria and if the men are still in the pipeline. They told them they do not know because Paria officials are keeping everything very secretly, and they just went there and they said, "Ma'am, I would like you to pray and pray a lot." I fell on my knees, begging God for this not to be real. For a state-owned company, you all didn't have the decency to call the immediate wives to let them know this big tragedy happened in our country, and you never had a small little piece of, a heart to call the families of the deceased divers and let them know what is taking place. I have no respect for you all. The families of the 5 divers waited at the car park for news, day and night. Paria gave us nothing and was doing nothing to save these men. They, the Paria officials, never called any of the families, and we are still waiting for justice. Paria, you all are murderers, and we want this whole board to be fired because you cooperate with the deaths of our men. My home is not the same without our breadwinners taken away from us. The government called for the Commission of Inquiry. This had taken almost 16 million. What the families got? Nothing. They are laughing at us, saying we are weak, but I want them to know I'm going to fight for justice till the end. To the Prime Minister, the same way you came the next day and said our husbands are dead, and you tell the whole world our husbands, they are dead, and they were still alive days after. You need to come out the same way and meet and greet the family. We want justice. We want you and the Paria officials to come out and have meetings with us. As of this week, we are going to march in front of Paria as every day goes by, every Thursday as we meet. In other countries, Coast Guard fight to save lives. In our country, they pointed guns for the divers who were willing to save these men. I was there, and I can tell you, I am not lying. I was there from the beginning, and I can tell you all the people who were involved in this. And we need them to, for the government to remove the officials from Paria. And we want quick response. The report Mr. Lynch had given us, he said it's not an act of God. And I think we are all clever and we know exactly what it means. They are all murderers. He clearly says Paria officials had left these men to die. And I end here. Thank you.
One cannot help but be deeply moved by the tragedy of it all. I, for one, will never forget the words of the 11-year-old Elia Henry. When I got word of my father stuck in a pipe at Paria, I froze to know that, but I prayed and I prayed that my father and his friends will be safe. I went down to Paria with my mother, praying for a miracle. My father and his friends to be free. However, that did not happen. It is as well to remember how this commission of inquiry came about. It was unequivocally as a result of public pressure, the desire for you, the public, to have a real attempt at truth, to find out what happened, why it happened, why was so little done to rescue them, and how we can stop this ever happening again. It is imperative that we all ensure that this never happens again, here or anywhere else. And I want to assure you, as I did last time, that there is absolutely no truth in it. I've not spent 40 years of my life as a barrister to be cajoled by some compromised political, commercial, or financial considerations. I believe I was employed as the chairman of this inquiry because the government wanted someone completely independent, untainted, and that is what they've got. These men, as I said already, did not die by accident. What they're left with, and their families are left with, is posturing of the potential parties, perhaps challenging the very findings of this inquiry before they start fighting with each other, each insisting that they got nothing wrong. For all the money that has been expended on the process so far, much more is almost certain to be spent before the families will see a single dime or dollar in compensation for them of any kind. We feel compelled to observe that the victims of this tragedy have very little, if any, help in dealing with the loss, both mentally and financially. We cannot help but think this is something that should have been addressed, if not by the companies involved, then possibly by government. It would have been an act of kindness and human decency to have made some kind of ex gratia payment without accepting any liability at all and given to them when they need it most. But this, as you will appreciate, is out with our remit. I say it on behalf of Mr. Wilson and myself because we're human.
To be improper for me to take any position as implied by Mr. Malcolm Jones, a former executive chairman of Petrotrin, under whose stewardship that GTL plant came to grief. Let me say this, right? There are two people in this country who has given the country human service in the energy area, which has put us where we are today in a lot of things that we take for granted. One of those persons is Professor Ken Julian, and the other is Malcolm Jones. These are pioneers. There was one project that went horribly bad. That is not an issue for debate. That is a very clear statement of converting gas to liquids for diesel. But it didn't go right for a variety of reasons. But accept that it was a business deal that went bad. And it was a deal that went bad in a company which the state owns. And a lot of money was lost. Malcolm Jones is to be held accountable for $1.5 billion in losses.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Is Mr. Malcolm Jones not involved in some advisory capacity on an energy committee of this administration?
Malcolm Jones is a member of I think it's a 16-man committee.
Why? Because the reason I asked Prime Minister, I don't mean any disrespect, but if I made a decision that cost my family business $1 billion,
well, understand,
they would run me from there.
Wait, Malcolm Jones was part of a board of a management of a state enterprise.
He was chairman.
Yes, but you see, you are saying Malcolm Jones, we say the board of Petrotrin, we say Petrotrin. Mr. Jones' presence on that committee allows us to get a certain kind of information, a certain kind of insight that because he was Petrotrin chairman, because that was only one of Petrotrin's businesses. Petrotrin's a multi-billion-dollar enterprise that Mr. Jones managed for a long period of time.
Or mismanaged, depending
Well, you could say that. Well, you could say that. That is how the PNM deals with people. And that is how we dealt with Malcolm Jones. And if it is that there are people who believe that they would have dealt with it differently, then that is reasonable. And that is their option. We know how they dealt with it. We know what the outcome was. But I think for it to be a national conversation, that there's something that ought to be lauded in persecuting a person who served this country in the way that Malcolm Jones has done. All that does is to ensure that nobody else of his caliber comes into the public service if they can help it.
In the face of mounting criticism about his administration's decision to discontinue the case against Malcolm Jones.
If before it got to the court, it was $41 million, and the case has not even begun, what kind of legal fees do you think will end? And then your lawyer tells you have virtually no chance of winning the case. What then is the board to do?
That was the question Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley put to citizens today in the face of mounting criticism about his administration's decision to discontinue the case against Malcolm Jones. At today's post-cabinet news conference at the Magdalena Grand Hotel in Tobago, Dr. Rowley defended the decision.
Our position is quite clear, that if they could have removed from the court Mr. Jones's matter, the matters that we had already won in the court, we insist that they also withdraw all of those appeals. So Mr. Jones cannot get special treatment, and the workers of Petrotrin, certainly OWTU members, singled out for a different type of treatment.
As a person coming out of our soil, reaching where he has reached, and the skills that he brought over the decades, forget that. And a government sets out to persecute him. And they ask this government and the new board to continue the persecution. I beg to differ. And they ask this government and the new board to continue the persecution. I beg to differ.
Such obvious public importance and controversy because it was announced by the Attorney General himself, not Petrotrin, which is a bit odd. The Attorney General, as you'll see from the press statement, uniquely referred himself to the Law Association for his handling of the case. Why on earth would you do that? The Petrotrin is a state-owned company and a major employer, spending and losing public money. And 6,000 staff were fired, which for Trinidad is a huge loss. And all of this was a direct consequence of the financial mismanagement which resulted in this litigation, or this litigation concerns. It is naturally a very real concern for people in Trinidad. More specifically, people are asking themselves, why was a claim to recover £97 million of public money withdrawn? What was the justification for that? And that's made worse when the failed project caused Petrotrin to lose US $3.3 billion in losses and led to the collapse to which I just referred. That, for Trinidad, is big money. All of this was a direct consequence of the financial mismanagement which resulted in this litigation, or this litigation concerns. It is naturally a very real concern for people in Trinidad. More specifically, people are asking themselves, why was a claim to recover £97 million of public money withdrawn? What was the justification for that? And that's made worse when the failed project caused Petrotrin to lose US $3.3 billion in losses and led to the collapse to which I just referred. That, for Trinidad, is big money. Why was a claim to recover £97 million of public money withdrawn? What was the justification for that? And that's made worse when the failed project caused Petrotrin to lose US $3.3 billion in losses and led to the collapse to which I just referred. That, for Trinidad, is big money.
Malcolm Jones, as a person coming out of our soil, reaching where he has reached, and the skills that he brought over the decades, forget that. And a government sets out to persecute him. And they ask this government, and the new board, and the new board, and the new board, to continue the persecution. I beg to differ.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. To the Honourable Prime Minister, given that the final report of the Commission of Inquiry into the Paria tragedy recommended that compensation be given to the families of the victims who were involved in this fatality without accepting liability, will the Prime Minister state if the government has considered offering compensation either through Paria or other avenues to the affected families on behalf of the state?
Even though Paria is a state-owned entity, the government is not now in a position to override those situations and responsibilities. And it would be quite unusual at this stage for the government to override the responsibility and role of the board and other entities involved. Malcolm Jones, as a person coming out of our soil, reaching where he has reached, and the skills that he brought over the decades, forget that. And a government sets out to persecute him. And they ask this government to continue the persecution. I beg to differ.